So, September 1st, 1939, German troops storm into Poland, and just like that, the most destructive war in human history kicks off. But here's the crazy part, the real paradox. This global catastrophe erupted less than 21 years after the end of what was supposed to be the war to end all wars. I mean, really think about that for a second. An entire generation that had lived through the absolute horror of World War I was now about to watch its own children go off to fight in even deadlier war. The peace was just unbelievably, tragically short. So how on earth did this happen? Well, it wasn't just one thing. It was more like a cascade of failures, a series of dominoes, really, that just kept falling one after another. So let's do this. Let's trace that chain of events right from the very beginning. All right, so our story, it doesn't actually start in 1939. We have to go back further to 1918, to the very end of World War I. Because the peace treaty that was supposed to guarantee a peaceful future, well, it turns out it did the exact opposite. It basically planted all the seeds for the next big one. You see, the whole foundation for this new peace was just incredibly shaky from the get-go. First off, in Germany, this really dangerous myth started to take hold. They called it the stab-in-the-back myth. The generals were claiming the army was never really defeated, but that it was betrayed by politicians back home. At the same time, you have these new nations like Czechoslovakia being carved out of old empires, and this created a ticking time bomb, because now you had huge German-speaking populations trapped inside these new borders. And the one group that was supposed to prevent all this, the League of Nations, it was basically crippled from day one when the U.S. Congress voted not to join. America just retreated back into isolation. And as if all that political chaos wasn't enough, then you have the money problem. Germany was ordered to pay a staggering £6.6 billion in reparations. I mean, that's just an astronomical sum. The idea was to make Germany pay for the war, but what it really did was completely cripple its economy and create this deep, bitter resentment that would fester for years. And this, right here, just perfectly shows the huge gap between the dream of the Treaty of Versailles and the cold, hard reality. The promise, right? A new world of peace and diplomacy, but the reality? A weak League of Nations, angry populations, and total economic ruin. Yeah, instead of ending all wars, the treaty pretty much paved the highway for the next one. Just tragic. So you've got this perfect storm, right? Chaos, resentment, economic depression. It's the ideal breeding ground for a brand new type of leader. We're talking about dictators who saw all this weakness and knew exactly how to exploit it for their own gain. And in Germany, of course, that was Adolf Hitler. And his rise to power was just methodical. He played it perfectly. When the 1929 stock market crash just devastated the German economy, he pounced. His Nazi party becomes the biggest in parliament. Then, in 1933, he gets appointed chancellor, and he uses the Reichstag fire as the perfect excuse to grab emergency powers, killing German democracy overnight. A year later, the president dies, and Hitler just merges the two jobs, declaring himself the absolute leader, the Führer. But here's the thing. Hitler wasn't the first to try this. Down in Italy, a guy named Benito Mussolini had already cooked up a whole new political system, fascism, and it was basically the blueprint for authoritarian control. You have a single dictator, and the state has total power over every single aspect of life. And if you dare to oppose them, you're crushed. Simple as that. And it's actually pretty easy to see why fascism seemed like such a great idea to a lot of people back then. For many Italians and even folks looking in from the outside, Mussolini looked like a savior. He put an end to all the political chaos. He created tons of jobs with these huge public works projects. He cracked down on the mafia, and he built a really powerful military. In the middle of the Great Depression, his strong, decisive government looked a whole lot better than the struggling democracies in Britain and France. So now you've got these new, aggressive dictatorships in power. The big question was, how is the rest of the world going to respond? The answer, unfortunately, was a deafening silence. This next chapter is really defined by a clear, depressing pattern: aggression on one side and total inaction on the other. So the dictators started to push. They wanted to see what they could get away with. In 1931, Japan invades Manchuria. The League of Nations says, hey, you can't do that. So Japan just walks out, and nothing happens. Then, in 1935, Mussolini's Italy invades Abyssinia. The League puts some sanctions on them, but they're so weak they're basically a joke. And then, the big one, 1936. Hitler marches his troops right into the demilitarized Rhineland, which was a direct violation of the Versailles Treaty. And Britain and France? They do absolutely nothing. The message to the dictators was loud and clear. Aggression works. But the real test case, the ultimate dress rehearsal for what was to come, would happen in Spain. The Spanish Civil War became this brutal training ground for World War II. It was a place where they tested new weapons and where the alliances of the future World War were literally forged in blood. The two sides were drawn up pretty clearly. On one side, you had the elected Republican government. They were getting help from the Soviet Union and thousands of international volunteers. And on the other side, General Franco's nationalists, who were getting heavily armed and supported by Nazi Germany and fascist Italy. This was a proxy war, plain and simple. Europe's big powers were basically using Spain as their personal sandbox to train soldiers and test out their gear and ideologies. And it was right here, in Spain, that the world got a horrifying preview of what the future of war was going to look like. In April of 1937, planes from Hitler's elite Condor Legion were just unleashed on this tiny Basque town called Guernica. It wasn't a military target. No. This was an experiment in a whole new kind of terror, the deliberate bombing of a civilian town from the air. Something like 6,000 civilians were killed. The attack sent shockwaves around the globe. It was a brutal, terrifying demonstration of what modern air power could do and a crystal-clear signal of the kind of indiscriminate horror that was just around the corner. So, with fascism winning in Spain and the democracies proving over and over that they just weren't willing to fight, Hitler saw a clear path ahead. The final dominoes were about to fall, and they were going to fall with breathtaking speed. I mean, just look at how fast this all happens. March 1938, he annexes Austria without a single shot fired. 6 months later, Britain and France literally hand him a piece of Czechoslovakia at the Munich conference, hoping that'll be enough to appease him. He promises it's his last demand, but just 6 months after that, he breaks his word and takes the rest of the country. The final pieces all click into place that summer, leading directly to the invasion of Poland. And that brings us to this infamous quote. After flying back from Munich, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain literally waved the piece of paper signed by Hitler and declared to the world that he had secured peace for our time. He truly believed that by sacrificing a piece of Czechoslovakia, he had stalked a bigger war. It was just a catastrophic miscalculation. And then came the final unbelievable twist. Just as Britain and France were trying to make an alliance with the Soviet Union to stop Hitler, Stalin completely stunned the world. He turned around and signed a non-aggression pact with his #1 sworn enemy, Hitler. And secretly, they agreed to slice Poland up between them. This completely cynical deal removed Hitler's last major obstacle. It freed him up to invade Poland without having to worry about a war on two fronts. Which brings us right back to the central question. After 2 decades of a broken peace, the rise of dictators, aggression being rewarded time and time again, and these cynical backroom deals, by this point, was a Second World War already inevitable? That is definitely something to think about. Thanks for joining me.